Good morning. Thank you for the introduction there, Robin. I should clarify, so I'm an industry manager, so there are several of us, in case you do come across another Google industry manager. So I work primarily with large OTAs in the UK. So slightly new audience for me today. Great to hear a bit more about Edinburgh tourism businesses. So what I'd like to do today is to talk through what's new in terms of what we're seeing for the travel customer journey. I'd then like to take a quick dive into Edinburgh specifically, so I've got a few stats there. Then in terms of what's coming up next, I'd like to highlight a few tools which you may or may not be aware of to help your businesses adjust to this ever-changing landscape. Then, if we've got time, I'd like to quickly demonstrate Google Now and how we're adapting to these changes as well. So just before we dive into the agenda, I'd just like to kind of, as context, just state that Google always bets on growth. And currently we're seeing the vast majority of growth in user time and interactions coming from experiences outside of the traditional desktop and laptop. I know last year that mobile was a very central theme, so that will be coming up again today. But if there were three things that I'd ask you to take away from this presentation, I'd say the first is that the number of screens is increasing and the line between those screens is getting blurred. The second is that mobile is fast becoming the first way of interacting for a lot of consumers, and that video is the first preferred way to consume content. And finally, what matters out of all of this is really understanding the context. It's less about device and it's more about the context that the device is being used in. So Alex talked earlier about mobile being a very last-minute medium. It's also a research medium, so I'll touch upon that. So the ever-changing travel customer journey. In terms of talking about screens, there's been a story for a while now about 3 screens or 4 screens if you include television. So that's obviously your mobile, tablet, desktop, laptop, and potentially TV. So what we're really seeing is actually, sorry, missing a slide there. Okay. Well, what we're seeing is actually a 6-screen world. So desktop and tablet. Desktop still exists, obviously. It's still the most trackable revenue source for most businesses. But we're seeing that the line's blurred with other devices. So we acquired a couple of companies which actually are working on gesture-based interfaces. I don't know if anyone's seen the film Minority Report, where they kind of gesture and move the screens. So shifting the interface to being more tablet-like. I think Lenovo make a tablet which actually converts into a laptop as well. So mobile, again, obviously very well established now. Motorola are actually undertaking an initiative where they're looking to do for hardware what Android has done for software, which is to make it more open source, to allow people to actually customize the hardware on their devices. So again, that starts to question what's a mobile, what's a tablet, what's a desktop, so really changing and blurring those boundaries. So tablet, huge focus of growth over the last few years. We'll be looking into some of the stats around that shortly. I think there are some interesting things going on in this space. I believe it's Senseg who are working on haptic feedback. So if you think currently when you touch a tablet, it's just telling you that you've touched it. So they're looking into, could you actually convey different textures via a tablet? So really changing what the whole interface with online can be. Wearable tech, Alex mentioned Google Glass earlier, and Samsung launched their Samsung Gear, which is a watch, a very high profile launch last year. Again, a very emergent technology. And in car, so I don't know if anyone was following CES, but there are a lot of announcements about heads-up displays in vehicles. And we announced the Android Open Automotive Alliance, which is about working with car manufacturers to get the Android operating system working more effectively in vehicles. So that journey is becoming more complicated, and it's only going to get more so. I'm sure if we came back in a year, we might be talking about 9 screens. So just to take stock of where we are, So over Christmas 2013, more travel searches actually came from mobiles and tablets than desktops. So people have been talking about this for a few years, but it's important to understand that this is now, this has happened. It's not much of a leap to understand how mobile can start to become that first way of interacting for consumers. So 2/3 of consumers say they always have their smartphone with them. That's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are all kinds of disturbing statistics out there about people, the first thing they look at when they wake up, last thing they look at before they go to bed. So have a look around some of the stats there. Tablets. So 1 in 3 UK consumers now use a tablet, and we're still seeing 30% plus growth in travel searches. This is for the UK, going into 2014. And I think what's important here is really the context of these devices. So tablet obviously is a much more shared device, often shared around the household. We're seeing around 80% of usage is actually on the sofa. So it's very much used concurrently with television, often with mobile and laptop as well. So just in terms of hours, 4.4 hours a week browsing and shopping on their devices. So just an idea of where that fits in as well. So in terms of online video, I think three-quarters of all UK internet users have watched online video in the last 3 months. In terms of the numbers, that's increased from 6 billion in 2010 to 12 billion videos watched a month in the UK for 2013. So massive increase in video usage. So that's 6 billion of hours globally every month. And I think a lot of people, when they're talking about mobile, they talk about a stripped-down version of the booking engine, and they're looking for those last-minute bookings, which is, it's understandable, it's where the easy revenue is. But if you're looking at what most people are actually spending time doing, there's a huge inspirational research piece on mobile. So we're seeing 40% of global YouTube watch time coming from mobile devices. People have always said, the screen's too small, data plans are restrictive, but a lot of this is over Wi-Fi on a mobile device too. So again, think about the context rather than the device. And social media in terms of accelerating that process. We talked a bit about how important the experience is and how that's shared. I think actually experiencing the holiday, the mobile is becoming key here with sharing photos in particular. So how does this actually impact the way that people purchase? So traditionally you obviously had your cycle of inspiration, which might have been perhaps a DMO running a large scale campaign in other markets, researching where obviously you might have had your brochures and your offline, and then coming in through digital and search. The booking process, experiencing the holiday itself, and then traditionally the sharing would come afterwards where obviously people would have their holiday snaps and chat to friends about their experience. So now we're seeing sharing continuing throughout that process. So people are looking for affirmation of, have I got the best deal? Is this right for me? What recommendations do people have? We're also seeing some of these devices play a huge part in the dreaming and researching phases. So I think currently most travel businesses are really focused on that green booking stage for mobile, but there's a huge role for it to be played, almost like a brochure in some instances. So I think in terms of these devices shifting user behavior, both online and offline travel buyers now typically research online too. So I got some statistics here, I think, about how this breaks down by market. So the important bar here is the dark blue. So you can see these are the people who don't research or purchase online. And this is increasingly declining. You can see Italy is slightly higher than the other markets. So the question you have to ask yourself is, if someone's coming to my business and booking directly, have they actually interacted with me already via a digital platform? And what's the value of that to me? So talking a bit about context as well. So actually we're seeing a lot of mobile usage in the home and over Wi-Fi. So this is where perhaps the likelihood of an actual purchase via mobile may be highest. There's the in-market last minute booking, but there's also this purchase at home. Then on the move, it's very much more of a research device. In terms of how these shift throughout the day, you can see that desktop peaks during working hours. You tend to see tablet is very much aligned with the evening, much like TV viewing, in fact. Mobile has the peaks during commuting hours, but overall the volume is much higher there in the evening. So the typical travel consumer journey is incredibly complicated, and there are a lot of different touch points. In terms of where we're seeing some of these key points coming through, reviews, obviously a key one for travel. Typically more than 60% of people are looking at reviews before deciding on accommodation. That would be a similar, if not higher figure for restaurants, I believe. I think what some players are doing particularly well in this space is understanding this and incorporating it into their own sites and ecosystems. So hotels.com do a great job here of acknowledging that people are looking for review content and actually bringing that in, not only from their own consumer reviews, but also incorporating TripAdvisor scores within the hotel pages. So maps, again, a hugely underestimated part of the consumer journey, and it was great to see with the Royal Yacht that maps were a big part of that site earlier. I think this is a big part of validation. So if a hotel tells me it has an ocean view, I don't have to rely on their word for that anymore. I can go onto a map and I can double check. My girlfriend was recently booking a trip to Berlin, and she was actually arriving a day before the rest of her friends. So what she wanted to do was actually check, are these hotels in a safe neighbourhood? So what did she do? She went onto Street View and she had a look around. So does she feel safe staying there? So there's some really interesting applications of how this works. I'd also recommend having a look at Late Room's recent app launch. So they've really put maps at the centre of that experience. So it's understanding that if people are looking for a last-minute hotel booking, location is really key. So I touched upon this briefly, but whether on or offline, people are looking for reassurance and validation. And I think this is something that technology has facilitated and the economic climate of the past few years has also encouraged. So is this place what it says it is? Can I rely on it? Am I making the right choice? Is it right for me? And perhaps most importantly of all, is it offering good value for money? And I think particularly around accommodation and certain in-market offerings, some of the OTAs have really shifted perception on this. You can actually cancel essentially up to 48 hours with no financial burden. So we're seeing that people will potentially cancel and rebook if they feel they're not getting a great deal. So in such a complicated landscape where the customer is perhaps more informed and more price sensitive than ever, how do you focus on what really matters for your business? And I think the key here is in stepping back a little from all of these different devices and really understanding who your consumers are, where you have a right to have a conversation with them, and the tone of that conversation. I think particularly with mobile at the moment, a lot of people are trying to push for a booking perhaps too early. Perhaps it's time to understand that if someone's in New York and researching Edinburgh, and you're selling a tour, for example, perhaps it's time to offer them some video content to inspire them about Edinburgh, and then at a later date, perhaps push to sell that tour. So I undertook a little bit of research into Edinburgh as a destination, looking at some of the statistics we had, and it's pretty much a microcosm of what we've just discussed. So diving in, top line, global travel queries for Edinburgh increased 11% year on year in 2013. So that's searches for tourism-related searches for Edinburgh. So that's fantastic news that there's definitely growth in demand. Now, unsurprisingly, that growth is really coming from mobile and tablet. So if you look at the blue area of that chart there, which is desktop and laptop, it's relatively static year on year. So all of that 11% is being driven by these devices. Now, the question you have to ask yourself is, if you're not seeing that 11% growth in booking for mobiles, is what are people looking for there? So I work with some of the cruise companies, and they're actually seeing over a quarter of queries for cruises coming from mobile devices. Now, people aren't booking a 2-week Caribbean cruise on their phone. It's not happening. So what they're really looking into is something about research. So I think stepping back and thinking about that for your consumers is vital. Just to break down in terms of where we're seeing the searches coming from and where the growth is coming from, UK and domestic, unsurprisingly, takes the lion's share, with the US coming in second, and a few mainly European markets coming up behind. I think there's pretty strong growth there, with the exception of Germany and Spain. I don't know if this is reflected in terms of what you're seeing in terms of the mix of bookings to your businesses. I think these are figures that most destinations would be envious of. So what are UK consumers searching for Edinburgh hotels, so using that as a proxy for tourism, also looking for? So I had a look into other local attractions and other types of businesses that they're also interested in. So unsurprisingly, the castle dominates. It's a great landmark to really push Edinburgh. The pub comes up second, never too far from the British public's mind. So unsurprising perhaps. Obviously a strong kind of depth in terms of historical and cultural attractions. Interestingly, Leith showing really strong growth. If you go back, I haven't put the data in here, but for 2011, that's considerably lower. So I guess the redevelopment of that part of, I know it's not technically Edinburgh, but that part of the city, perhaps to an outsider's view, and perhaps some of the key destination restaurants there might be playing a part. Arthur's Seat also interestingly showing growth from a very low base rate. I don't know if that's been used in any promotional materials around the city or why that necessarily is. So how about the US? So looking at the second market in terms of search volumes. So the Americans are more cultured than the Brits when it comes to Edinburgh. Very much more of a historical skew. The pub still crops up, but not quite as high up. The festival, Arthur's Seat again, Royal Mile, all showing very strong growth. But what about in terms of competition? So which other cities are people perhaps considering when they're looking for Edinburgh? So around 9.4% of people who are looking for Edinburgh hotels, again using that as a proxy for Edinburgh tourists, are looking at other cities as well. Domestic skews very highly, London, Glasgow given the events coming up around the Commonwealth Games, and Manchester. I think what's interesting here for me when I was looking at this data was Paris, Amsterdam and Rome. So my question would be, is that perhaps your competing city break traffic? So how do you position Edinburgh against these cities? Okay, so we've talked a bit about what's new in terms of the travel consumer journey and where that appears to be heading. I'd now like to have a quick look into what's next. Someone once said, it's very difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. Alex has obviously given us a bit of insight into what the new technology that's likely to be coming on board for businesses is over the next few years. I thought I'd highlight a few Google tools which can really help your business adapt to whatever comes. I feel a lot of people probably use Google Trends. I don't know if people are familiar with this, but there are a few other tools that are perhaps a bit more unsung. So the full value of mobile calculator. So this is a free tool. A lot of businesses we speak with really find it a challenge to make a business case for investing in mobile. They know their customers are using it. They know it's the future, but they can't necessarily see the direct attributable revenue. So this is a great tool to take that first step in understanding how it might be impacting your walk-up bookings, or how this might be actually attributing to other parts of your business. Our mobile planet. So again, on the mobile side of things, this is a great resource for finding statistics and comparison metrics around different markets, particularly if you're obviously looking beyond the UK. Consumer barometer, a similar tool in some respects for our mobile planet. This looks at overall purchase behaviour by market. So again, valuable if you're looking to expand where you're targeting. And this is a relatively recent launch, Google Consumer Surveys. I should mention the prior three tools are all free. This one does have a cost associated with it. It's a market research tool. So it just allows you to do very quick, very intuitive surveys. And it's around 10 cents, 10 pence per customer response. So in terms of finding those tools, don't worry, you don't have to remember all of those names. If you search for Think with Google, there's a website which has a range of case studies, and all of those tools are featured there. So, how are Google adapting to this shift, this myriad of devices and context? So, there was some talk earlier about field trips, so I did consider showing that, but I actually thought that perhaps Google Now might be a better example of how we're using these contexts of location, of personal preference, of history, to really try and serve interesting content to people who are traveling. So I'm going to tempt fate and try to do a live voice demo with a tool that's been calibrated for US accents. So this has potential to go disastrously wrong. Can we switch to... Okay. Yeah, I can... So just to, if anyone's not familiar with Google Now, it's sort of like a digital personal assistant. So a lot of this functionality is actually very similar to Google Glass, but is available on the latest releases of Android phones. So that's coming up now. Okay. So let's imagine that it's my first visit to Edinburgh. I've arrived, I've checked into the hotel, and I'm keen to explore the city. I haven't really made a lot of plans, but I've heard a lot about the castle. So just to actually, before I dive into this, you can see that this is brought up. It knows that it's got my flight confirmation email. So it's really about serving users the right information at the right time. It knows I've got a flight at 7 p.m. So it's serving me that flight reminder and giving me status about that flight. Similarly, it's serving information about nearby attractions down here. So it recognises I'm in Edinburgh. It's got local bus information is feeding in. And there are a few other updates, the weather, for example, there. But, okay, so let's say I'm interested in the castle. Okay, Google. Show me photos of Edinburgh Castle.
Pictures of Edinburgh Castle. Here you go.
So I don't know if you can hear the dubious American pronunciation coming back, but it's bringing up the photos of the castle. So it looks pretty good. Can see why you put it on the shortbread tins. I'm going to think about actually visiting. Okay, Google. What time does it open? So you can see it understands sorry, it's a bit of an angle on this. It's understanding the context of what I've looked for before. It knows I'm talking about Edinburgh Castle. So I don't need to restate the place. It brings up the opening hours, and it understands that that's a location-related query. So you can see my blue dot there is my location, and the castle is there with the pin on the map. Okay, so let's say I'm driving and I'm particularly lazy and I want to drive there. Okay, Google, driving directions.
Getting directions to Edinburgh Castle.
So again, about providing that seamless experience and reacting to the context. So what it's doing now is it's taking me into a navigational interface. If I hit start there, it will take me into essentially what's a satellite navigation. And this now actually includes traffic information as well, so you can even understand if there are traffic problems on that route. So just to go back. So let's say I've looked around the castle, had a fantastic time, but I'm a bit peckish, and I really fancy getting a bite to eat. Okay, Google. Okay, Google. Restaurants nearby.
Here are the listings for restaurants within 0.9 miles.
So you can see it's bringing up the restaurants nearby. Again, maps is kind of very heavily integrated because these are very location-related queries. You can also see that the reviews there and pricing information are included as well. And I can actually call those restaurants directly from those listings. So I think for businesses in this room, I'd definitely recommend having an explore of this, and just make sure that your listings are set up to take advantage of a lot of these new technologies. So finally, let's say I've suddenly remembered I've been a really terrible friend and I've forgotten my mate's birthday. So I have to give him a call when I get back home to apologise. Okay, Google, remind me to phone Ben when I get home. Okay, find Ben, it's come up with, so it's not quite got it. But what it's done is it's set a location-specific reminder. So because I've been prepared to share where my home location is with the device, it's allowing me, instead of a time-based reminder, when I get home, that will go off and say, remember to phone Ben. So hopefully that illustrates how we're kind of adjusting our products around the context that consumers are using devices. I should state that this also works on other devices as well. I just couldn't really manage juggling across a tablet or phone and desktop. And I think just to re-emphasize the 3 points on the theme of what's now, what's next, and what matters. So what's now, the consumer journey is changing. In terms of those interactions, it's getting more complicated. What's next is really, I think, mobile being one of the primary interfaces that people use to seek information, but that might well be actually research, depending on the context, and that video is the way that a lot of people choose to consume information. And in terms of what matters, it's really about taking it back to understanding where you have a right to speak to your audience and adjusting your tone accordingly based on these different interactions. So that's it from me. I'm aware it's been a bit of a whirlwind tour through this content, so if you have questions, please feel free to grab me at lunch. Thank you.